for being here. Sorry, I need to get this out of my screen. So I'm just gonna really talk about what we do at Glenn Howells Architects. We are a practice of about 120 people. So we're medium-sized practice, and we don't have a team, if you want, dedicated to all things to do with data performance for a building. In fact, I'm the sustainability lead as well as senior architect for the practice. And I'm only got about 2 days a week in principle dedicated to the sustainable aspect of a practice and driving low embodied carbon design. So I'm just going to quickly go through the project range we do and then try to explain how in the practice we are trying to understand low carbon design. I would provide an example in practice of the way we use one of our tools, and then the challenges on the high-rise, the high-rise building that we deliver, and then just in general, just summarize with some of the challenges we face. So our project range really from the single building like the Savile building here to high-rise towers on the right-hand side here, the Warden, which I worked on for planning delivery, as well as master plan, and then some of refurbishment or new commercial building. We have a wide range of building. In terms of low carbon design, I call it low carbon design because I think, first of all, there's no such thing as far as I'm concerned as a net zero carbon building as such, unless you build, a building from the mud under your feet. But low carbon design, in fact, I can say that there is knowledge and there is experience and understanding that dates way back at Glenn Howells. We did this Savile building with this roof timber structure, completely done with timber. We did a triangle completed over 10 years ago where we use hemp, lime, timber, side ventilation, you name it. We went through a lot of aspects that we now refer to in terms of low carbon design. And another example is this the steel tree top walkway bridge with this massive timber post, some galvanized balustrade, but also the walkway itself is made of timber. So we have that. The challenges for us is to deal with these projects that we have, and we have quite a few of them, which is the high-rise building. This is London City Island, where we also completed the English National Ballet, and that was recently completed. So how do we deal with low carbon designing this really high-rise building in the cities? So I'm just going to explain in practically, not strategically. We've done a roadmap and we've done some strategic document, but in terms of how we get the team to work on it, the studios to work on this thing, we've got about 9 studios now across the 2 offices in Birmingham and London. So first of all, started maybe 3 years ago now, 3-4 years ago, this what I call the slow carbon design toolkit. And I will show you this further on. We also train studio champions, and every new staff that come in now, we take them through a training about definitions, about what do we mean about material choice, about lots of stuff. It's about a 2-hour session, and everybody that comes new, gets to do this. We have project design reviews where we interrogate ourselves, and it's not to say where we get everything right. We engage with our clients and the team really early on. This is so crucial, as you may have heard already in other network meetings. We have a weekly newsletter, so I try to, push in all information I get, from various sources on the products, on projects, not our project necessarily, all things that can help us think differently. We have a quarterly update where we present information about our work and how we assess the carbon of our buildings. And then we keep abreast, obviously, with a new publication, and we engage with network groups. So I'm part of ACAN. We are signatory to Architects Declare. We've contributed a little bit also to the LETI work, which is amazing work that's been done by that network. And we're also part of New London Architecture for tall buildings. And then I develop an internal library. So to keep, again, all this information together. So we developed this low carbon design principle. We try to keep it as simple as possible. You have to understand that people in our studio, they're designers, and you know, they need they don't necessarily like to deal with data or stuff like that. So we try to make it kind of, you know, as simple and as graphic as possible. And we have you know, we present it as two aspects: key aspect, embodied carbon, mainly to do with structure, material, minimal waste, and obviously facade is part of that. And then, and also other stuff like internal finishes. And then we also have this whole section on operational carbon. And basically, we try to say, if you adopt these principles, then you will arrive at a low carbon building. So an example, and this is, we have many, many pages for all these principles. For example, for every one of them, like structure, we you know, make a list of the key aspects, and we illustrate that with information that we gather from intelligence, mostly from other people, a lot from engineers. I have to say the engineers in general have done a fantastic work in the last few years on everything to do with reducing carbon. And Bureau Happold is one of them. They came also to our offices and to do a presentation about their research, amazing research. I do comparative studies. The same with material. So, you know, we try to push a message of local sourcing, long life building, healthy bio-based material, low polluting. One key aspect when we talk about low carbon design is that we focus on the embodied carbon, but I like to stress with my colleagues that actually a lot of high impact material that we use you know, extraction of this raw material are some in places in the world that are not regulated as much as we are in the UK or in Europe in terms of environment issue. So it's not just about carbon in the atmosphere, is also about the impact on the environment. I really like this principle that my former tutor at the Center of Alternative Technology shared, the 80-20 principle. Try to think 80% good material and 20% the more high impact material that you may have to use in all cases. So there's a balance to be struck, and obviously every project is different. There's no doubt about this. So about 3 years ago, I developed this tool that we call the Sustainable Design Checklist, where basically for each of a project, we interrogate the approach, the design approach of a project in terms of reusing existing structure, in terms of passive approach to the design, in terms of designing light, clean, lean, and for the future. So it's a 2-page document, as well as, you know, building with healthy city and living in mind. This is a 2-page, so this is just the first page I'm showing you here. And basically this checklist allows us to have very early on, but it can be used at every stage of the project, an idea of where our project sits. So I thought I would give you the example of this project that we have, where I had a look at that project only at stage 3, the Lakeside Activity Center in Peterborough. And the initial assessment for this project, which is a climbing center in the middle of a national park, was not very good, right? There were lots of aspects to deal with the design that really were not very low carbon at all. So the steel frame structure, the cotton cladding, the metal decking for internal finishes, the type of services that were proposed, and in terms of, you know, healthy city, you needed to use mostly a car to get to that place, and also it's the fact that you added something in a natural park but didn't have such a big structure to start with, you know, for me anyway, meant it was a kind of a low point for this. But nonetheless, you know, the client wanted our project. So what the team did after we did this initial assessment, after looking at this proposal for the design, you know, they started to look at low carbon alternative. And instead of using concrete foundation, they looked at screw pile foundation. They looked at considering a timber structure or recycled steel structure. Okay, and we worked in this project with Arab, who you know, provided these amazing sketches. And all of a sudden, all the structure is all timber, right? Glulam columns, beam for the skeleton frame, glulam timber cassettes, roof timber castle panel, marine plywood, timber screws, bolted connections, everything that means you can also disconnect the structure in the future. So that was a good point. In terms of cladding, they decided to go for zinc-coated steel, which arguably is not the most low carbon option possible. But what they did, the reason why I wanted to highlight this particular cladding, and it's maybe for that project would have been better to go for something a bit more low carbon, but it's for some of our projects also, it's important to look at the technology that is being used to produce what is considered traditionally as high carbon design. In this case, this project is actually manufactured using bio-based technology, rapeseed oil more than fossil fuel. So it's not everything produced with rapeseed oil, but most of it. Looking at the EPD for the products, there is a slight, not significant, but still some reduction compared to organic coated steel sheet, according to the ICE database. Also the importance, I think, to looking at companies that invest in technology that use the production system that reduce embodied carbon to start with is quite important that we support that. And in this case, they will use hybrid technology. So that technology will allow this particular company in Sweden to produce iron and steel without emitting CO2. And obviously, I mean, this cladding is quite durable, so it does have some benefits in that respect. The result of having made these changes is that we got now a sustainable building. It's not yet what I would call a regenerative building. For me, to get to regenerative, you need to get to 85% or more in my system. But at least, there's some big changes that were made to make this particular project much more low carbon. And actually, when we started to look at the calculation on low carbon, we ended up being less than 400 kilograms CO2 per square meter. Okay, so what do we do in terms of the calculation of embodied carbon? First of all, our targets, so this is targets for residential, but we look at the other targets as well. We are, in general, our statement to our clients is that we are the minimum or the maximum, if you want, is the RBA targets for 2030. So it's for instance, for residential, is the 625 kilograms CO2 per square meter GIA. Some of our clients, I'm pleased to say, want to go further than that. They want to go much lower than this, and we obviously embrace that totally. But this is what we say is our, our minimum. So we have done some calculation on our project, and actually we've compared. So this is a list. This is some mostly residential project here, and we looked at, using the calculation, some calculation tool, we looked at the sort of value that we get. And we looked at it compared to the, when it was at stage 2, so when it went for planning. And also we compare that with our own rating with sustainable design checklist that I just showed, and what rating, to see if there is correlation between the two as well. And yes, 3 years ago, 2 years ago, even some of the projects were quite business as usual, but we can see that there's an evolution in terms of getting lower in terms of the carbon impact. So what tools do we use? We as a company have decided that we were not ready, or we didn't want to invest for various reasons strategically into the tools like 1PKCA tool. And I have to say that I also stress to my colleagues that we are not carbon assessor. We are designers. So what we don't want to get into the nitty-gritty of a carbon assessment. What we want to do is to understand the impact of material choice, of structure choice, etc. But we don't want to be boiled down into the carbon measurement itself. It's not our role to do that. It's our role to facilitate low carbon design, but not to actually necessarily, prove that we deliver it. However, we need to be completely fully aware of the impact of what we do. So we use open source carbon tools, sorry, like the Field and Care and Braggley Studio carbon tool. We also rely increasingly, and especially for our larger projects, on our structural engineering providing us with information. I think it's critical because structure, we know, has one of the most important impact in our project, especially all these high-rise project that we do. So we rely on them and we ask them to produce that information if they don't do it automatically, but for larger projects, most engineers are very much on board. There's no question about it. And I have to say the Institution of Structural Engineering tool is a fantastic tool. And then the mesh tool sometimes, an online calculator. So it depends what it is, whether we look at the project as a whole or a specific element like a facade in our project, we might vary and look at the different tools and play with them to see where we are, okay? So for instance, in this project, which was a high-rise building, one of the towers, we looked at the tower and we compared using the Film Clare and Bradley Studio Carbon tool, you know, the impact of different cement replacement strategy on the project, right? So we share that information with our staff so that they understand and that they also ask the right question. Again, I have to say that now on our larger project, a lot of the structural engineering approach, the baseline approach is to have some GGBS replacement. I know there's some issue now with GGBS. Some people are saying there's an issue of supply, or mostly recently I've heard that there's an issue of cost. That could be related to the supply as well, I'm not sure, but it was apparently 20% more expensive. So nonetheless, you know, this, as we can see here, can have a significant impact on the structure. So in parallel to the tool, the checklist that I've shown you, we are also sharing constantly with our studio information. In terms of high-rise buildings, so the key thing I try to stress is the choice we made in terms of structure, working obviously closely with a structural engineer, the facade and the material choice, they are all interlinked together, obviously. So for instance, with structure, we try to indicate, you know, what is considered a low to high carbon. For that, this information is based on several sources. It's based sometimes on our own project, what we get from the structural engineer, as well as other consultants that work on our project, as well as other information that is on the wide web, and there's a lot of it. So it's amazing what you can find out there. And we tell our project studios, you know, this is the range of carbon intensity that you can find. So low carbon would be glulam plus CLT floors is about the 130 kilogram CO2 per square meter mark. Then you've got the moderate carbon steel frame composite slab or concrete frame plus, post-tension slab as well, depending on, you know, the thickness of a slab can be around that. It's moderate, but for me, it's actually moderate going on to becoming quite intensive. So what I'm saying to people is if we look at, for instance, in a high-rise residential building, the RBA target of 625, you don't want the structure to be more than 250 kilograms CO2 per square meter. Otherwise, you will never get to that target. So you need to be careful, you know, look at these elements one by one. And then obviously we share information that are, you know, going through the internet, through, this is a website who wrote several fantastic articles in the RBA journal on the impact of grid on the CO2. So try to get people to understand, and structure grid is important, the love your column, like the structural engineer would say. This is information also produced by Bureau Hapoel Engineering, grid size by structure type, the impact on CO2. So as I say, there's loads of information out there. The content, for instance, for a post-tension flat slab, and you see, you know, the impact of GGBS and how it reduces. So it's just to show people, you know, all the options that are there. If you have to use concrete, maybe, ultra high performance concrete is a solution. Look into it, do your research, ask for the environmental product information. We do the same for the facade. Obviously, we try to, you know, facade is quite an interesting element because obviously, as far as architects are concerned, it's what your project is demonstrating on the street, or, you know, it's what you see. A lot of people will know about the resource row project in Copenhagen, where they used the 1 square meter of actually brick panel that were cut up. Actually, the reason why this was done that way is because the mortar in Netherlands is that's Denmark, is quite very hard, so they couldn't get the brick, so they decided to cut the panel, and that resulted in a 12% reduction in the CO2 for that project. But there are also other instances, like this example of replacing ceramic bricks, terracotta, recycled containers. Have a look, these projects are all on the internet. So we try to push for these things, and also look at other things like the building form. Again, looking at information. Make Architects did a fantastic studies on the impact of facade and also the building form as well. And there's the Net Zero toolkit, which I highly recommend by the Passive House Trust and Elementa Consulting. So here we simplify the form to have an impact not only on the operational in terms of the heat loss for the building, but also on the embodied carbon, because at the moment we calculate the embodied carbon per square meter. So simplifying the form means you have more GIA. So these are the things, the information, the intelligence that we share. Other intelligence here to do with if you're gonna have to use these elements like steel, aluminum, obviously aluminum is the worst of all in virgin form, but you know, look at the data and make your choice. PPC much better than anodized if you have to use that. And we do material comparison, the same for structure, you know, what is considered a low carbon facade to a high carbon facade. We have to be careful here. Some of the information given for facade is per area of square meter of a facade. So you need to convert that obviously on GIA. And here is some comparative data provided by one of our consultants on our building. So we share this information across our studios so that they understand that they can make choices and they can go for the least impactful choice. As I said before, the key thing is to engage very early on in the process. On the right-hand side here, you can see the potential of carbon reduction at each stages. So it decreases dramatically as soon as you reach stage 1 or 2. So, you know, we engage very early on, first meeting, if not second meeting maximum, about low carbon objectives, you know, the necessity to have a zero carbon consultant team in place and having workshops, etc. We also, you know, push for inception of a sustainable procurement plan. So if you have a construction team on a board, and we had that on one of our projects from the beginning, it's even better. It's more difficult, I have to say, for us to convince the client to undertake POE as part of project delivery. And then as you go down the stages, you know, obviously you have to go into more details and make sure so you have the right quality check in place during the construction. Because this is critical. You can design the best building, for instance, in terms of passive house as possible on paper, but if it's not executed properly, this is not gonna happen. So we have our commitments. We formally signed up to this, for UN Race to Net Zero for the small and medium enterprises, and also formally signed up to 30 Climate Challenge area targets in 2021, although we used the targets before, although we knew from the start that the previous targets that are produced had some problems with it. So the idea is that all this information that we're going to gather on our project, we share it also to the wider network, like some people have already done. And then just to finish, just to highlight some of the challenges that we face, plan commitments is one of them. As I've said before on some of the networks, I think the biggest challenge for us is the smaller client, the medium-sized client maybe. Our larger clients are very much on board at the moment, at least in terms of their ambition. Sometimes limitation on material choice to do with supply chain, the fire issue in terms of facade and other issues to do with structure, the cost, you know, as I said, GGBS apparently it can be now more expensive. We have to be aware also that data is constantly evolving. So for instance, there was a recent review of the CLT impact in terms of carbon by ARAP, I think, and Bureau Harpole, and which means that if you did a comparative study 6 months ago, last year on using CLT versus like steel frame, sometimes the CLT didn't come better at all, but actually there's been a revision about the data behind that, meaning, you know, so we need to keep abreast of these things. And then one thing I would like to stress is what is the culture within your practice, right? As I said before, some of the people, they're not Excel people, or they're not interested in data, or they want is to do their design. So to convince and to push everybody to, you know, embrace this this new, if you want, newish kind of approach to design by looking at data is also quite important, and looking at benchmarking, even though, you know, everybody has pressure on the Element project. And then last but not least, you know, every quarterly update, we remind our staff, you know, the scale of a crisis, what we're looking at, what we're doing this. And, you know, the news are constantly coming in on these issues. We also share the network news because it's some fantastic work has been done out there. And we also highlight, and I'm not showing examples here, but we have internally shown example of brainwashing, right? And so we, as a practice ourselves, we try to be humble about what we do. We try our best. We're not pretending to be successful in every project, but for us, every little step matter, and we try to make the effort, which I think, you know, is at least a good start. That's it for me.
Fine. Yeah, a quick one for us. I was delighted in our team to have somebody not only from the States, but a representative from Ireland as well. So we're a very kind of intercontinental group. There were a few things raised in our group. One was, and something I've personally kind of come up against, which was about consistency of reporting data and just fully understanding the scope of, you know, when a number is presented, you know, fully understanding the scope that built the numbers behind that. So kind of consistency of data was something that was brought up. We also discussed the paradox of, or not paradox, but potential conflict between design and numbers. You know, so those, you know, architects who love design, and that's usually the reason they've become architects, are now increasingly coming up against more and more numerical solutions to help them design better, and that is difficult. And there were things mentioned about you know, like the EPDs, the product data sheets that you get for materials. You know, it was a real pain to look through to find the single number, and access to simple data was again mentioned as a real plus. If that could, you know, magically fall out of the sky for your particular design, that would be easier. And a final point just about clients being keen at the start, but because this isn't regulated yet, it was something that would be dropped fairly quickly because prices were rising, because of extra work that had to go into figuring out what the numbers were and analytics. Who wants to pipe up from? Well, let's start. I think I was in breakout room 3. Who was in breakout room 1? Who wants to speak up from breakout room 1?
I don't know if anybody else apart from me wants to step in. I think. Yeah, somebody wants?
Sure. No, go for it, Sophia. Go for it.
Okay, so actually you talk about the consistency of reporting data. It was raised as well, the accuracy of using the carbon tools in our group. And my response to that is actually that as we should use these tools, especially the open source tool, early on in the stages without being bogged down with the result as such. We should look at the range that we're getting at. You know, if our project returns 525, well, obviously it's not going to be 525 ultimately. We know that for sure, but at least it gives us a range of, you know, where we're at within the scale. So the first thing is, as I say, gather intelligence about what is a low impact structure, low impact facade, and you gather that intelligence depending on the size of your project, either from your consultant. The best way, as I said before, for us in terms of a high rise is to look at the structural engineering data, because it's the most reliable of all data. They have the quantities and they, you know, derive from our models. And then the rest, you know, the facade, the same. If you have a facade consultant on board, get that information from the facade consultant, and then use the tool to extract the rest of the information, put it together. So have an idea in your head about what constitutes a low carbon structure and a low carbon facade, and then compare that to your ultimate target. And, you know, it gives you a certain amount for the rest. So try to build up that information to start with. You're not going to be accurate. The client needs to appoint, and this is a point that we stress very early on for a large project for sure, even major scale project. You know, they need to appoint low carbon assessor if they want to get to net zero carbon building. Okay. We have also somebody raised the issue that we're going to talk about the client's commitments and how to convince the client to choose the right product. And again, my view here, also working, talking from a perspective of being a co-director of a small practice, is, you know, engage the conversation early on, even with your small clients. Suggest to them an alternative. Some of them might know nothing about, you know, the use of CLT instead of steel, you know, and the cost, you know, you can look at that with a structural engineer and try to convince the client that this is the right solution. It's not going to be always easy, because we know with the smaller clients that, you know, cost will come first. But, you know, and I hope we're going to discuss that further. It's less a problem in some of the projects I've reviewed at GHA with a larger client, in the sense that they are ready to make that commitment, with the exception, obviously, of a fire issue that we all know about, post-Grenfell, and the insurance issue. They are, in cases, and also because some of them will have to pay anyway a tax, if you want, on their carbon emissions, you know, they get that information. So it's not so much of a problem with a bigger client. And then there was a point made about, we discussed very briefly about POE. For us, I have to say at GHA, it's really difficult to convince a client to do a POE. But we try to at least engage that conversation early on. And, you know, we may get one in a year, 1 or 2, 3 clients that agree to provide the data, certainly for operational energy. So you can only get that information if, first of all, you engage that conversation, and then it might be, oh no, we're not interested. And I would like it personally in my practice to try to push ourselves to do it anyway in some of the projects, you know, just to make a point about what we achieve. Right.
Cool. Okay, thanks, Sophia. The breakout group 2, does somebody want to just summarize, just very, very briefly, a couple of points from the discussions in breakout room 2?
Yeah, I think we were in breakout room 2, but I'll share.
Whichever group you're in, you can summarize.
I didn't pay attention to that part. I'm sorry, but anyway, yeah, we come up with a few sort of general points. First of all, it was just about understanding, you know, what is embodied carbon, and people getting a handle on that. And I shared what our practice has done, which actually produced an embodied carbon tool for 10 and 11-year-old school children. And quite a lot of architects in our practice have said, actually, this is really useful. We could use it at this simple level. And it took me back to one of Sophia's slides, which had a similar sort of tool, which was like ultra low carbon materials up to high ones. And that's a sort of level, I think, to get the initial engagement, which was the second challenge. You know, how do we get people engaged across the practice? There's some of us who are really keen on sustainability, and we're probably all on this call, but, you know, there's a lot of people who are not uninterested, but busy doing other things. Which methods to use to assess it? You know, it's very complex when you get into it, and you've highlighted the numbers, Doug. So that was something else. Another point that was raised was the balance between operational energy requirements and embodied carbon. And sometimes, for example, you know, triple glazing, yeah, great for operational energy, but it's bumping up the embodied carbon. And the final point that was made, but one that affects us all, is time. You know, we've got some real passion on some projects to do this, and then, you know, the client comes along and he wants his drawings next week, and, you know, we end up going almost down to the lowest common denominator and the simplest design, and it's not always the one that we should be following.
Yeah, and that's a fair point. Yeah, time is never anybody's friend, is it? And unless you've got a pet R&D project at the moment, or you know, you've got dedicated time in your job role to carve that out, or you want to work some extra hours in the evening, it can be really, really tricky. And certainly for those watching the bank account, they're going to want to squeeze every billable hour out of a consultant, or you're trying to make your project as profitable as possible. That's really tricky. Breakout room 4. Does anybody remember if they were in breakout room 4? Somebody want to speak?
That must be us. I feel like we've gone through all the others, but I know I should have gone first. I think some very, very similar themes, to be honest, in our group. You know, based primarily, regardless of the sort of scale of project, primarily kind of client commitment, getting them excited about the process, understanding. You know, for me personally, you know, understanding the process myself, and us as a company understanding it before kind of delivering it in a concise way to the clients and getting them kind of on board.
Okay, cool. Kat, I'm guessing were you in group 5?
I was in group 5. So yeah, we had some interesting conversations. Shivdita is from India, and she was saying that there's no targets. They don't have anything like REAP 2030 out at the moment. So that was a big challenge at the moment, is no one's really talking about it. And also converting what is theory into practice, I think, is a lot of people are realizing they're needing to do it now, and it's converting what we're learning on webinars and everything and actually being able to do it in person seems to be quite difficult. But yeah, those are major topics, and I think everyone else has covered off everything else. So we've got 8 minutes till 11. So what I'm going to do is do a quick breakout room to our next one, which is on client engagement. And it sounds like you guys have kind of covered that in some of your conversations you've already had. So it can be a really quick one. I say really quick intro, get into the conversation, and we'll come back. And if people want to stay a little bit longer for a bit more of a discussion, feel free. But if you need to drop off of 11, I fully get that. Okay, so we're going to go into the breakout rooms now.
I've got a question for you, Sophia. Which was
Does anyone have any questions?
Yes, I do.
I can't hear you.
Okay, I'll talk because everybody else can probably hear me. Right, I've got a question for you, Sophia. I constantly in my mind, I've got the how to make understanding these kind of numbers easier for non-numerical individuals, and obviously we've been talking about Excel spreadsheets and mesh calculators and other calculators that other companies have been doing, and one of the things that strikes me is there are practices of all kinds of different sizes using all kinds of different 3D modeling software, some not even using 3D modeling software at all. I'm just wondering if you've got any thoughts on how you see being able to access embodied carbon data accurately evolving kind of over the next few years. There's obviously going to be massive change over the next few years in the entire industry, but how you see architects accessing that information if they're not necessarily using 3D modeling, how do you, and maybe in 3 years' time, embodied carbon does become regulated. How do you imagine or see that playing out for architects and how they?
I'm not a BIM specialist, but I think maybe it might come up with a plugin eventually, like for instance with Revit. Rather, at the moment, what happens is, like for some of these tools, which is not the one we use, I have to say, you know, you extract the Revit information in terms of quantities, and then you export them you give them away. I mean, and there are some obviously tools that you need to pay a license for that do amazing jobs in terms of churning out the figures. But I think eventually it might come as a plugin. And you know, as I said, I think a lot of architects, they don't want to be involved in this in a respect. They just want to press the button. They're already building their design. They think they've done everything with a 3D modeling, and they want to press a button and say that's what it gives you, right? So maybe, you know, but as I say, I'm not a BIM specialist, so maybe I'm not the best person to answer that question. We decided not at the moment to use, as I say, any other license. We looked into it. We have a head of BIM in my office. We also looked at the culture of our practice, and we tried, for instance, Hawkins Brown developed the HBERT tool, which involves Revit, and produce again great graphic and result that is very good to show your client. But we tried it, and we thought it's not for the culture of our practice. People want, when the few guys who were really kind of screwed on in terms of BIM and data and stuff used it, they thought, now this is going to be too complicated for most people, they won't want to use it. So it's very important that you understand the culture of your practice and what people are prepared to do or not to do. And that's why eventually we decided to go for the simplest tools possible. And so sometimes I do say to people, if you're just looking at one element, like your wall structure, use the mesh tool. You know, you can have both the data in terms of embodied carbon as well as the U value. So that gives you some information, right?
Okay, cool, thanks.
Brilliant. Does anyone else have any questions? If not, we'll end it here. And thank you so much for everyone coming along. I've had so much fun. I'm so glad we've been able to do this on Meshwork. Oh, Talene's just said something. Are UK-based practice using the EC3 tool? Oh, no, that's in the chat.
Yeah, sorry, I was just responding to one of the chats.
Yeah. But if no one else has any more questions, I really hope you've all enjoyed it. I'll send the chat to everyone and the recording with Sophia's presentation on, and we'll be looking forward to doing one of these again in the future. And I've learned so much from it, so brilliant.
I was just gonna, sorry, Kat, I was just gonna say, Sophia, are you up for, if people do have questions like after the call, are you happy with Kat sharing your email and they can just reach out and ask a question? You okay with that?
Absolutely,
Cool.
yeah, no problem at all. We've benefited so much from intelligence gathered and put together by other people. We're more than happy to share as well, you know, what we can. Okay.
Yeah,
amazing. All right, I will end it here, but thank you so much, everyone. It's been brilliant. What a great way to start the morning.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Cheers. Have a
See
good
you
day.
next time.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Everyone.